I had just pressed post you. It's nothing grand. Just a short story about the first time I read Jane Eyre under a flickering lamp in my tiny college dorm. I thought maybe a few old colleagues would smile. Maybe one or two neighbors would leave a kind comment. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed on the wooden table. The screen lit up with Linda's name, my eldest daughter, 42 MBA, manager of something I never fully understood. Her message appeared in 3 sharp lines that sliced through me. Mom, stop writing those silly stories. Nobody cares. You're embarrassing us. For a moment, my chest froze. The air seemed to turn metallic. My fingers trembled so hard I lost my grip, and the phone slipped from my hand, landing on the table with a hollow thud that echoed far too loud in my quiet kitchen. The device felt heavier than stone when I picked it up again, as if every ounce of my children's scorn had sunk into that small rectangle of glass and steel. 1,000 pounds pressed down on my palm, on my heart. I sat there, staring at the words, unable to blink. The late afternoon sun spilled across the floor, but instead of warmth, I felt cold. A draft sneaking under the door, raising goosebumps on my skin. Embarrassing. The word wouldn't stop ringing in my ears. I had been many things in my 74 years: teacher, widow, mother, provider. But never had I imagined being called an embarrassment by my own child. I pressed the phone against my chest, as if the gesture could muffle the sting. But the letters were already etched into me, carved deeper than chalk on a blackboard. I remember whispering aloud, "To no one, Linda. How can my words shame you, when they once built the roof over your head?" The silence of the room answered me. The refrigerator hummed. While somewhere outside, a car door slammed. Inside me, something cracked. I tried to steady my breathing, but every inhale scraped my throat raw. My hands reached automatically for the old oak box that had sat on the corner shelf for decades. It still smelled faintly of varnish and chalk dust. Inside were piles of yellow drafts, lesson notes, and fragments of stories I had never shown anyone. They had been my private pulse, my proof that I was more than bills and meals and sleepless nights. Now, Linda's message turned that pulse into a crime. I wanted to type back, "Do you remember 1998? When I sold my wedding ring to pay your tuition? Do you remember 2005? When I worked nights so you could chase an MBA abroad?" But my thumbs refused to move. What good were reminders, when her eyes saw me only as an old woman scribbling nonsense? The phone buzzed again. Another message. "Please delete it. People might see. Don't make this harder." My vision blurred. The letters seemed to swim. My breath hitched, shallow and fast. The kitchen clock ticked, merciless and loud. Delete it. Erase myself. Be quiet, because my stories were shameful. I pressed the phone flat on the table and stared at the tiny cracks in its case, like spider veins across glass. For years, I had believed my silence was love. That if I gave enough, money, time, even my voice, my children would feel secure. But in that moment, staring at the glowing demand on the screen, I realized silence had not protected us. It had erased me. My pulse pounded in my ears. I pushed the chair back, the legs scraping the tile. I opened the curtains wide. "Let the light in, even if it hurt," I said out loud, my voice hoarse but steady. "I am not your shame. I am not your silence." The words hung in the air, fragile but defiant. I picked up the phone again. It still weighed 1,000 pounds, but this time I held it tighter. Because deep down, beneath the hurt, something else was stirring. A heat, a spark I hadn't felt since my teaching days, when I used to stand before 30 restless teenagers and insist that stories mattered, that voices mattered, and maybe, just maybe, mine still did. I could not know then what one post, one silly story, would unleash. I could not imagine the tidal wave that would come, or the secrets it would drag into the light. All I knew, in that breathless instant, was this: the story they tried to silence would not only survive, it would strike back, when the sting of Linda's message finally loosened its grip. Memories surged in like a tide I could not stop. They came with numbers, dates, smells, the details of a life I had built, piece by fragile piece, only to watch it turn into something my children dismissed. I was a literature teacher for 37 years. My salary was modest, barely enough to cover the basics, but I learned to carve out savings with the discipline of a surgeon. 200 here, 300 there, every month without fail, tucked away in a separate envelope. That envelope became the invisible bridge that carried my children from childhood into adulthood. 1998. I still see it clearly. The year my son David was accepted into university. His smile was proud, his shoulders squared like a man ready to conquer the world. The acceptance letter lay on the table, but alongside it sat a bill I could not pay: tuition. Too steep for my salary, even with the envelope of savings. That night, I opened the small velvet box where my wedding ring had slept for years. I turned it over in my palm, the gold dulled by time, the stone modest but still catching light. I whispered an apology to my late husband, then walked into a pawn shop and exchanged love's symbol for a crumpled stack of bills. I told David, "Go, study. Don't worry about money." He didn't ask where it came from. Maybe he didn't want to know. 2005. By then, Linda dreamed of an MBA abroad. The cost was monstrous. Flights, tuition, housing. I was already 60, my hair thinning, my knees aching from decades of standing in classrooms. Still, I said yes. I tutored 3 nights a week after my day job. Sometimes I came home so late, the moon had already crossed the sky, and I still had to prepare lesson plans for the morning. I learned to live on 4 hours of sleep, surviving on instant coffee and stubbornness. I remember my hand cramping as I graded essays at 2 a.m. Yet I pushed through, whispering, "This is for Linda." Every sacrifice was written in numbers. 804 Linda's flight to London. LT2 400 for her first semester housing. $600 wired at midnight when she called crying about overdue fees. I kept the receipts in a folder, not to hold against her, but because I needed proof that my exhaustion had meaning. Through all those years, my constant companion was the oak box on the shelf. Dark brown, corners chipped, smelling faintly of ink and varnish. Inside, I kept drafts of stories, half-written lessons, lines of poetry scrawled during staff meetings. That box was my secret world. Whenever life pressed too heavy, I opened it, ran my fingers over the papers, and felt a tiny spark return. Words were my oxygen, even if no one ever read them. But to my children, that box was nothing but clutter. I remember once, maybe 10 years ago, David walked in while I was writing in my notebook. He laughed. Not cruelly, but with the careless superiority of someone who had forgotten the weight of struggle. "Mom, nobody reads your scribbles. Just rest." The way he said scribbles, like they were dust, like I was foolish to waste ink when I could be napping. I laughed along then, closing the notebook, pretending it didn't sting. But deep inside, I felt the first crack. Now, as I sat in my kitchen decades later, their words returned like echoes. Linda's embarrassing, David's scribbles. Different years, same dismissal. Had I raised them this way? Had I taught them that money mattered more than memory? That survival trumped voice? Maybe by giving too much. I had trained them to believe my worth was measured only in sacrifice. I whispered to myself, perhaps I spoiled them. Perhaps I turned myself into an unconditional bank account. The thought burned. Bored! I looked again at the oak box on the shelf. My hands shook as I opened it, pulling out a draft from 1979. The paper had yellowed, but my handwriting marched across the page, steady and proud. A story about a widow raising children, too ordinary for publishers, but too dear for me to throw away. Reading it now, I felt a strange ache. That young woman on the page had believed her words mattered. That young woman had not yet pawned her wedding ring, not yet worked herself to the bone on 4 hours of sleep. She had not yet been told by her own children that her voice was an embarrassment. I pressed the pages to my chest. Tears came, hot, uninvited. Maybe, I thought, my children would never care. Maybe my words would never matter to them. But inside that oak box was proof that I had lived more than bills and bank transfers. Proof that I had once been a woman with stories, not just an endless fountain of sacrifice. And perhaps it was time the world saw them. The messages didn't stop. Linda's texts kept dripping onto my screen like acid. Delete it. Don't embarrass us. You're not thinking clearly. Each word chipped away at me until I felt small, as though my 74 years of sacrifice could be erased with 3 dots on a chat bubble. David didn't text often, but when he did, it was worse. Mom, stop acting like a teenager. We need you focused on bills, not fairy tales. Bills, not fairy tales. That was all I was to them. A wallet that could walk, cook, and wire money. I carried the phone upstairs and sat in my bedroom, the evening light slanting through half-closed curtains. The oak box sat on the dresser, dark and steady, waiting. I lifted the lid with trembling hands and stared at the thick stack of drafts, all my words pressed into silence for decades. I whispered to myself, barely louder than the hum of the air vent, "If I stay quiet, I will die slowly in this darkness. I have the right to write. I have the right to live." The words startled me. They sounded foreign, bold, almost dangerous. My heart thumped like it wanted to burst through my ribs. I looked at the bank folder on my desk. For years, I had let the transfers run like clockwork, the monthly $1,000 to David, the 800 to Linda. No questions asked, no explanations given. I had told myself it was love, but it had become a leash, one I had tied around my own neck. With a deep breath, I opened my laptop. The glow of the banking website filled the room, sterile blue against the dimness. My hands hovered, sweating. For a moment, I heard David's voice in my head, "Don't touch it, Mom." Who wouldn't understand? I clenched my jaw. I typed anyway. Click. The auto transfer to David, cancelled. Click. The standing order to Linda, cancelled. Click. The joint account, closed. Each confirmation ping felt like a hammer striking a chain. My pulse raced so fast I thought I might faint. But when the last screen flashed, completed, I leaned back, breathless, free. Then I changed every password. Numbers, letters, symbols. Yeah, code only I would know. When the system prompted me to repeat the new password, my fingers stopped shaking. I closed the laptop. The room felt different, lighter. My shoulders dropped, as though someone had lifted a sack of stones from my back. Still, fear crept in. What would they do when the money stopped arriving? Would they storm through my door, furious? Would they drag me to court? A flicker of doubt gnawed at me, but I shoved it away. I walked back to the oak box, pulled out one of my drafts, and placed it on the desk. My handwriting looped across the page, shaky but alive. I typed it into my computer, word for word, then read it aloud. It was a story about a widow planting a garden in barren soil. No one believed flowers would grow, but one day they bloomed, defiant and bright. My throat tightened as I finished. It wasn't just a story, it was me. I opened Facebook again. My finger hovered over post, trembling. "In my mind," Linda hissed, "nobody cares. You're embarrassing us." But another voice, smaller, fiercer, rose inside me. "It's not for them. It's not for them. It's for me." And this time, I didn't hide the setting. I made it public. I pressed share. The click was quiet, almost ordinary, but inside me it thundered like a drum. For the first time in decades, I was not transferring money. I was transferring truth. I sat back, staring at the screen as the words glowed in black and white, out in the open. A strange calm settled over me. Whatever storm would come, I had crossed the line. I was no longer their endless bank account. I was a writer. It didn't take long. 3 days after I canceled the transfers, David appeared at my doorstep. He didn't even knock gently. His fist pounded so hard the walls trembled. I opened the door to find his face red, eyes blazing, his tie askew as if he had stormed out of work without thinking. "Why did you cut the transfer, Mom?" His voice cracked like a whip. "We have bills. I have a mortgage, 2 kids in school." I steadied my breath, refusing to shrink. David, I said quietly, I'm not your credit card. I'm your mother. And mothers are not banks. His jaw clenched, a vein pulsing at his temple. Don't play games. You owe us, after all we've done. All you've done? All you've done? I almost laughed, but the sound died in my throat. Before I could answer, the front door burst wider. Linda marched in, heels striking the hardwood like gavel blows. She carried a sleek leather folder, her lipstick sharp as a wound. She didn't waste time. She laid the folder on my dining table and slid out a stack of papers. Her manicured finger tapped the top sheet. Just sign this, Mom. Let me handle your pension. You're clearly not managing things well. I stared at the papers. Legal language swam across the page. Power of attorney, full control. My stomach churned. Linda pulled a pen from her bag, poised like a dagger. It's simple. One signature and everything runs smoothly. No more mistakes. My hand drifted to the pen, then stopped. I set it down on the table with deliberate calm. I looked her in the eye. No, I said. The only signature I'll keep is the one under my stories. For a moment, silence crackled in the air. David's breath came heavy. Linda's nostrils flared. David slammed his palm on the table. Stop being dramatic. This isn't about your silly writing. This is about survival. Whose survival? I asked softly. Yours? Or mine? Linda leaned closer, her perfume sharp, suffocating. You think your scribbles mean anything? They won't pay bills. They won't buy food. You're being selfish. Selfish. The word rang like a bell. How many nights had I gone hungry so they could eat? How many mornings had I walked to work in torn shoes so they could have new ones? I straightened in my chair. My voice no longer shook. I have given you food, shelter, education. I pawned my wedding ring so David could study. I worked nights so you, Linda, could fly across the ocean for your MBA. And now you tell me stories are worthless? Then you tell me, I am worthless. David's fist curled. You're twisting this. No, I said. I am untwisting it. Finally. Linda pushed the papers closer, her tone now honeyed but poisoned. Mom, please. Think about your grandchildren. Think about the family name. Don't ruin everything with stubborn pride. I picked up the pen again. Their eyes gleamed, too quickly. And then I set the pen down with a click that echoed like a verdict. I will not sign. David swore under his breath. Linda snapped the folder shut so violently, the sound made me flinch. Fine, she hissed. If you won't do what's best for us, we'll make sure someone makes the decision for you. Her threat hung in the air. I rose to my feet, slower than them, but steadier. I moved to the doorway and stood there, blocking the exit until I had spoken. I will always be your mother, I said, my voice low but unshakable. But I am not your puppet. I am not your pension. And if the only way you can see me is as a wallet, then you will have to live without one. Linda's eyes narrowed. David muttered something I couldn't catch. They brushed past me, storming out into the night. The door slammed so hard the windows rattled. For a long moment I leaned against the frame, my breath ragged, knees weak. But my heart felt strangely strong. I had not signed. I had not surrendered. I closed the door gently this time, whispering to myself, I will write my name only where it belongs, at the end of my own story. The letter came in a cream-colored envelope, heavy as if it carried stones. I slid it open with trembling fingers and read the words that blurred before my eyes. Notice of intended legal action. Accusations that I was no longer mentally fit to manage my own finances. A request for immediate guardianship to be placed in the hands of my children. And tucked between the legal jargon, the quiet threat of a nursing home. My knees nearly buckled. I had seen neighbors disappear into such places, their houses sold off, their voices reduced to whispers behind locked doors. The thought of my children, my own children, forcing me there was a wound deeper than any cut. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my bedroom until dawn. The letter spread open on my desk like a vulture with wings wide. Every sound unsettled me. The creak of the stairs, the ticking clock, even my own breath rasping too loud. I whisper to myself, they want to erase me before I've even gone. But I'm still here. I'm still me. By morning, I knew I couldn't fight this alone. I called an old name, a voice from the past, Michael Carter. He had once been the bright young lawyer who volunteered at our school debates, long ago. Now, 60, retired, but still sharp as flint. When I explained between sobs, he listened quietly. Then he said in his steady baritone, Margaret, I may be retired, but I have one case left in me. Yours. I felt my lungs expand for the first time in days. That afternoon, he came over, a tall man with silver hair, his suit slightly worn but his eyes alive with purpose. He spread the letter on the table, adjusted his glasses, and read every line. Classic coercion, he muttered. They're painting you as incompetent. We'll need evidence to prove otherwise. I gestured toward the oak box, the notebook stacked high. Will this be enough? He smiled faintly. It will help. But we'll also need witnesses. People who can testify to your clarity, your routine. I-night/take, all those a plain strategies, also a music white from ears. Alvarez, my neighbor of 20 years, knocked at the door. She carried a basket of warm bread, but when she saw the papers spread out, her smile vanished. Is it true? She asked. They're trying to take control from you? My voice cracked. They want to put me away, as if I'm already gone. She set the basket down and gripped my hands. Her palms were rough from gardening, but her grip was steady. No. I see you every morning at your desk, writing. I see the light in your eyes when you tell me about your stories. You're sharper than half the people in this neighborhood. I'll stand for you. Tears filled my eyes. You'd do that? She nodded firmly. I've raised children too. I know how cruel they can become when money blinds them. For the first time, I felt less alone. Still, the nights were cruel. I lay awake, replaying their words. Unfit. Embarrassing. Scribbles. The walls seemed to whisper them back at me. I imagined myself in a narrow bed behind nursing home walls, my oak box confiscated, my words shredded as irrelevant. I would get up at 2 in the morning, pour tea, and stare at the blank page. Some nights I wrote, other nights my pen hovered uselessly. But at least the act reminded me I was alive. The mornings saved me. Mrs. Alvarez would appear with fresh oranges or bread. Sometimes Mr. Lee from across the street would wave and shout, Still writing? Margaret? Good. Those small gestures anchored me, kept me from drowning. One morning, Michael arrived with a thick binder. He laid it on the table with a decisive thump. Documentation, he explained. Bank statements, your medical checkups, even the club membership card from your reading group. All proof you're competent. I laughed weakly. Proof I'm alive? Proof you're more than alive, he corrected. Proof you're in control. A week later, Linda came again. This time not with papers, but with her smile sharpened into a blade. Mom, she purred, we're only trying to help. Don't make this ugly. If you sign now, no court, no embarrassment. Isn't that easier? I stood straighter, Michael by my side. Easier for whom? I asked. Her smile faltered. Michael leaned forward. Mrs. Wilson is perfectly competent. Any further threats will be met in court. Linda's eyes flashed. So that's how it is. She turned on her heel and left. The slam of the door rattled the frames on the wall. That evening, Michael poured me a glass of water and said, This will get worse before it gets better. You're not alone. You have me. You have Mrs. Alvarez. We'll fight. I closed my eyes, feeling both terror and relief. The storm was growing, but at least I had an umbrella now. Every day was a seesaw. At night, fear pressed heavy visions of courtrooms, of betrayal, of my children painting me as senile. But by day, hope flickered. Michael's binder of evidence, Alvarez's firm promise, the simple kindness of neighbors. One moment, I shook like a leaf. The next, I felt the steel of my spine returning. I was no longer only the mother who gave and gave. I was a woman standing on trial for her own freedom. And I was ready. It happened by accident. One evening, David stopped by, pretending to check on me. He left in a hurry, his jacket draped carelessly over the back of a chair. After he stormed out, muttering about ungrateful mothers, the silence felt like shattered glass. I went to hang his jacket, my old habit refusing to die, when something slipped from the inner pocket. A folded sheet of paper, creased and smudged. I bent down slowly, my knees aching, and picked it up. At first, I thought it was another bill. But when I opened it, my breath froze. It was a photocopy of a legal document, Tria Power of Attorney. My name, Margaret Wilson, sprawled across the bottom in shaky ink. My supposed signature. My hand began to tremble so violently, I had to grip the table for balance. For a moment, the room spun. They hadn't just threatened. They hadn't just spoken cruel words. They had gone further. They had forged me. I lowered myself into the chair, staring at the page under the dim lamp. The letters of my name stared back at me like strangers wearing my face. They forged my name, I whispered, my voice cracking. The fear surged first, sharp and cold, crawling up my spine. What if a judge believed this? What if they managed to sell my house, drain my account, lock me behind nursing home doors? But then something else rose, hotter than the fear. Rage. A fire I hadn't felt in decades. I pressed the paper flat with both palms, tears blurring my vision. But my voice grew steadier. They forged my name. But they forgot. I know every curve of my own handwriting, every loop of my M, every sharp edge of my W. I had taught penmanship for years, corrected essays by the hundreds. My eyes knew ink like a mother knows the cry of her child. This forgery was clumsy, a cheap mask. The oak box called to me. I pulled it close, opened it, and dug out old letters, old lesson notes, journals dating back 40 years. Line after line in my steady, unmistakable hand, lifetime of proof. I spread them across the table beside the forgery. My real Margaret was clean, certain, almost proud. The fake one slouched like a drunk stranger. Side by side, the difference screamed. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel helpless. I felt armed. I stayed up that night, no longer pacing in fear but working with focus. I photographed each page of my writing, careful and deliberate. I labeled envelopes. I made copies. My kitchen table transformed into a battlefield, papers lined like soldiers ready for war. At 3 in the morning, I caught my reflection in the window. Hair wild, eyes red, but burning. I almost didn't recognize myself. I whispered to the glass. You thought I was weak. You thought I'd sign away my life. But you forged the wrong woman. The next morning, I called Michael Carter. He arrived with his binder, his steps brisk. I handed him the photocopy, my hands no longer trembling. He scanned it, then raised his brows. Amateurs. The strokes are inconsistent, pressure uneven. This won't hold. But they tried, I said. My voice shook with fury now. Not fear. They tried to erase me on paper. Michael placed a firm hand on my shoulder. Then we'll use their forgery against them. In court, this will not be their weapon. It will be their undoing. That night, when I finally closed the oak box, I felt a strange calm. For years it had held scraps of my life no one valued. Now, it held evidence. Proof of my existence, my voice, my truth. I no longer looked at it as a dusty relic. It was my shield. And I promised myself, never again would I let my name belong to anyone else. Michael insisted we rehearse. A courtroom is not just about evidence, he said. It's about presence. The way you hold yourself, the way you speak. You must believe your own truth out loud. So one evening he stood behind me as I faced the mirror. My reflection looked back. Older, lined, tired. But for the first time I forced myself to hold her gaze. Say it, Michael prompted. My throat tightened. The word scraped out, small, shaky. Again, he said. I drew a breath. My hands clenched at my sides. I am not weak. I am not forgotten. Louder. I straightened my shoulders. I am not weak. I am not forgotten. The reflection stared back, and for the first time in years, I didn't look away. The next days became a whirlwind of proof. Michael guided me step by step. From my drawer, I pulled my old diaries, page after page of neat handwriting spanning decades. Continuity, Michael explained, flipping through. This shows a sharp, consistent mind. From the shelf, I produced folders of bank statements. Each line of deposits and withdrawals testified to responsibility. Mrs. Alvarez offered something I hadn't thought of, the security camera outside her porch. Together we scrolled through footage on her laptop, images of me stepping out. Every morning at 7, walking to fetch the paper, returning with groceries, chatting with neighbors. Not the picture of a woman fading, but of one still active, still clear. Michael smiled. This is gold. We made copies, labeled them carefully. He taught me to stack them in binders so the judge would see order, not chaos. I didn't expect others to rally, but word spread quietly. Mr. Lee from across the street knocked one morning, holding a stack of printed photos from last month's community reading group. Use these, he said. You read aloud half the night? Sharper than the rest of us. At the library, Mrs. Boast, Campbell slipped me a note. Happy to testify. You corrected my grammar just last week. The pile of evidence grew thicker, but so did my heart. For every cruel word from Linda and David, there were neighbors reminding me I was still seen. Michael sat me at the dining table, a recorder between us. Answer as if I'm the opposing lawyer. He leaned forward, voice sharp. Mrs. Wilson, isn't it true you forget to pay bills? I felt my pulse spike, but I flipped open the binder and slid out the latest receipt. Every payment is here, on time. He nodded. Good. Now, Mrs. Wilson, why do you spend hours scribbling nonsense instead of managing your life? My hands trembled, but I spoke. Because writing is my life. It does not make me incompetent. It makes me alive. Michael stopped the recorder. That is what the judge must hear. The night before the first hearing, I laid everything out on the kitchen table. Binders, diaries, photos, camera stills, receipts. The oak box sat at the center, no longer a secret, but a shield. I placed my hand on it and whispered, We've hidden long enough. Tomorrow, we stand in the open. Sleep didn't come easily, but when it did, it was deeper than it had been in weeks. As dawn broke, I dressed carefully, not in black, not in defeat, but in a soft blue blouse I had saved for special days. I brushed my hair until the silver strands shone. Looking in the mirror one last time, I said aloud, I am not weak. I am not forgotten. I am ready. And for the first time in months, I believed it. The courthouse smelled of dust and polished wood, like old books locked behind glass. My hands trembled as I clutched the binder Michael had prepared, its weight grounding me, as if the oak box itself had followed me here in another form. The courtroom was colder than I expected. The air conditioner hummed overhead, but it did nothing to still the heat in my chest. When I entered, Linda was already seated. She wore a sharp black suit, her lipstick a slash of red that cut across her pale face. She smirked at me briefly before turning away, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of battle. David sat beside her, shoulders slouched, avoiding my gaze. He looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe it was I who had finally grown. Their lawyer, a man with slicked back hair and a silver tie, rose as the judge called us to order. Your Honor, he began, voice smooth and confident, we are here today because Mrs. Bias, Margaret Wilson, 74, is no longer mentally fit to manage her finances. Her erratic behavior, her obsession with scribbling nonsense stories, her refusal to cooperate with her children, all of this demonstrates that guardianship is necessary for her own well-being. Each word was a blade. Erratic, unfit, nonsense. I felt my throat tighten, but Michael leaned closer and whispered, Steady, let them speak. We will answer. The lawyer painted me as a frail old woman lost in fantasy. He waved documents I had never seen, supposed late bills, a note claiming I had forgotten my address once. Lies dressed as fact. Linda dabbed her eyes with a tissue at just the right moment. a performance worthy of the stage. We just want what's best for her. She sniffled, her voice sugary poison. David kept his head down, mumbling agreement when prompted. The judge, stern and silent, took notes. Every scribble of his pen sounded like a verdict already written. Then it was Michael's turn. He rose slowly, adjusting his glasses, and his presence filled the room with quiet gravity. "Your Honor," he said, his voice steady as stone. "My client is not incompetent. She is not erratic. She is a retired literature teacher, a woman who raised 2 children through decades of sacrifice. She is sharp, capable, and above all, she is still in command of her life." He pressed a button on the laptop set up before the court. The screen flickered, then came to life. There I was, just a week before, standing at the community library, reading aloud one of my stories. My voice rang clear, my posture strong. The video showed neighbors clapping, smiling, listening with rapt attention. "Does this look like incompetence?" Michael asked. "Does this sound like a woman unfit to manage her own affairs?" The courtroom was silent, except for the faint hum of the speakers. Even the judge leaned forward slightly. Next came the witnesses. First, Dr. Patel, my neurologist, calm and professional. "I examined Mrs. Wilson less than 2 months ago. Her cognitive functions are fully intact. Her memory, her reasoning, her language skills, all sharp. She is, in fact, healthier than many patients 10 years her junior." Then Mrs. Alvarez stepped forward, clutching her purse like a shield. "I see her every morning," she told the court. "She writes at her desk, she shops, she tends her garden. She even corrects my English sometimes. She is no invalid. She is my neighbor, my friend, and she is clear as day." Finally, Mr. Lee submitted photographs of me at the reading club, laughing, debating, holding the attention of an entire room. "She's the sharpest one among us," he said proudly. Each testimony was a stone laid on my side of the scale, tipping it back toward truth. Then it was my turn to speak. My knees wobbled as I stood, but when I looked at the judge, then at Linda and David, a strange calm settled over me. I cleared my throat. "Your Honor," I began, "I am Margaret Wilson. I gave these 2—" I gestured toward my children, "my blood, my sleep, my money. I pawned my wedding ring so my son could go to college. I worked nights so my daughter could study abroad. I sent every dollar I could spare, and many I could not. But one thing I will never give, not to them, not to anyone, is my voice. My story belongs to me." My words echoed in the room, firmer than I expected. I felt my spine lengthen, my chest expand. I continued, quieter now but sharper. "They want to put me away, erase me before I am gone. But I am still here. I am still writing. And I am not finished." For a moment, there was only silence. Even the judge stopped writing. Linda's painted lips pressed tight. David shifted in his seat, eyes glued to the floor. The judge leaned forward, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, his voice measured but decisive. "This court finds no evidence that Mrs. Wilson is mentally unfit. On the contrary, testimony and documentation confirm her capability. The petition for guardianship is denied. Mrs. Wilson retains full control of her finances and property." The gavel struck once, sharp as thunder. It was done. Linda's face drained of color, her smirk collapsing into shock. David bowed his head. Shame or anger, I couldn't tell. I closed my eyes, letting out a breath I felt I had been holding for years. Michael touched my arm gently. "You did it," he whispered. "No," I thought. "We did it, and I will never again surrender my story." Eaching. When the gavel fell and the courtroom emptied, I thought I would feel triumphant. Instead, I felt hollow, as though the victory had carved something out of me. Michael walked me to the curb, his hand warm on my arm. "Rest now," he said gently. "You've carried a war on your back." I nodded, but when I stepped into my empty house, silence crashed over me louder than any courtroom. The walls seemed too still, the air too cold. For years, those walls had echoed with phone calls, demands, the constant ping of transfers leaving my account. Now there was nothing but quiet. I set my bag down, sank into the chair by the window, and stared at the oak box. It waited, as it always had, patient and steady. That night, I lit a lamp and opened my notebook. My pen hovered, uncertain. What was there to say after everything? Then the words came, slow but steady. I won today. But freedom is not a verdict. It's a choice I must live daily. I stared at the line until my eyes blurred. The court had given me back my rights, but paper alone could not give me peace. Freedom was not in the judge's decree. It was in every morning I chose to lift a pen, every evening I refused to be silenced. Sleep didn't come easily. I tossed, haunted by flashes of Linda's red lips curling into a smirk. David's head bowed in shame. Did they hate me now? Did I hate them? At 2 a.m, I rose and padded to the kitchen. I poured tea, listening to the kettle hiss, the sound grounding me. I remembered nights long ago when I had brewed tea to stay awake grading papers. Back then, sacrifice had tasted like love. Now it tasted bittersweet, almost bitter enough to choke. I whispered into the steam. I gave them everything. But I cannot give myself away again. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the table. Mrs. Alvarez knocked on the door, holding a basket of oranges. "You did it," she said brightly. "We all knew you would." Her faith warmed me more than the tea. I realized victory wasn't just mine. It belonged to everyone who had believed me sane, capable, alive. Later, I walked into town. Some neighbors smiled, clapped my shoulder. A few whispered, "Brave woman." Their words felt strange on me, like clothes too new, but they fit better with each step. That evening, I returned home, lighter somehow. I pulled the oak box close again and wrote another line beneath last night's. I am not weak. I am not forgotten. And my story has just begun. I closed the notebook, pressed my hand against its cover, and breathed deep. The house was still quiet. My children were still distant. But the silence no longer felt like a cage. It felt like space, space that belonged to me. For the first time in years, I was not afraid of the quiet. I was free to fill it. I thought freedom would feel like thunder, like fireworks across the sky. But in truth, it came softly, like the tide rolling in, steady and sure. After the trial, I walked through the old house, touching the walls one last time. Every corner carried a memory. Bills spread on the table, arguments at the door, nights of sleepless worry. It was no longer a home, it was a museum of pain. So I sold it. With the money, I did not buy another quiet suburban cage. I booked a one-way ticket to Venice, a city of bridges, of canals, of echoes that welcomed voices like mine. I rented a small space near a canal, its brick walls peeling but full of character. With the help of locals, I painted it warm yellow, hung shelves for books, and filled it with mismatched wooden chairs. It became a cafe. But not just any cafe. It was a room of stories. On one side, the espresso machine hissed. On the other, a bulletin board where I pinned short tales and poems, handwritten and typed, mine and those of strangers who dared to share. Each morning, I brewed cappuccinos. The steam curled upward, sunlight slanting through tall windows, turning the foam golden. I would lift the cup, light as air, and remember, once. A phone in my hand had felt like 1,000 pounds. Now, this cup weighed nothing at all. At first, only a few wandered in, locals curious about the eccentric older woman who poured coffee and pinned scraps of paper to the wall. But soon, travelers began to stop. Some read quietly, others left their own words behind. One afternoon, a young tourist paused before one of my short stories, a piece about the widow planting flowers in barren soil. She smiled, pulled out her phone, and recorded herself reading it aloud with the canal shimmering behind her. I thought nothing of it. But a week later, people began arriving with that look of recognition. One whispered, "Are you the storyteller from TikTok?" The video had gathered 2 million views. 2 million hearts, strangers across the world, listening to the words my children once called embarrassing. I did not feel vindicated in the way I expected. There was no gloating, no craving for my children's apology. Instead, there was quiet joy, a warmth that spread as I watched strangers smile at lines I had once hidden in an oak box. A student from Germany left a note. "Your words made me call my grandmother today." A mother from Brazil wrote, "Thank you for reminding me. I'm more than just bills and chores." 2. A man from Japan pinned a haiku. Old hands writing still ink, stronger than memory. Freedom never fades. 2. I pinned them all beside my own. My cafe walls bloomed with voices, proof that stories never die when they are shared. One morning, as I watered the small geraniums by the window, I thought of Linda and David. Were they still angry? Still blind to who I was? I didn't know. Perhaps I never would. But I realized something. My story was no longer theirs to bury or define. It had outgrown them, carried now by strangers across oceans. I whispered into the quiet cafe, I was not their tired storyteller. I was the story that refused to die. And I believed it. My life now is simple. Morning cappuccinos, afternoon laughter of travelers flipping through books, evenings spent writing at a small desk, pen scratching steady, like a heartbeat. Sometimes, I still open the oak box, now displayed proudly on a shelf near the counter. No longer hidden, no longer shameful, visitors peer inside, marveling at the yellow drafts. I tell them, these were the seeds. The cafe is the garden. And every night, as I close the door and hear the canal water lapping outside, I smile, because freedom did not arrive in one courtroom gavel. It arrives each day I choose to live, to write, to breathe without fear. I want to end not with bitterness, but with gratitude. Thank you for walking this road with me. Through the silence, the trial, the fear, and the bloom of freedom. My name is Margaret Wilson, once told my stories were useless, now the keeper of my own key. I used to believe that my voice didn't matter, that the words I scribbled in notebooks were nothing but clutter. My own children called them embarrassing. They told me to stay quiet. For a time, I almost believed them. But standing here today, in this little cafe in Venice, I know silence is not love. Silence is erasure. And the only way to resist erasure is to write louder, to speak truer, to keep the pen moving even when hands shake. So I ask you, reader, listener, fellow traveler on this path of family and survival, if one day your own child silenced your voice, would you stay quiet or write louder? That is not a question for me anymore. I have chosen my answer. But perhaps it is a question for you. If my story has touched you, if somewhere in these words you recognize your own scars, I invite you, leave a comment. Share this. Follow along. Not for me alone, but for the countless parents, grandparents, and quiet souls who are out there right now, holding back tears because someone they love told them their voice does not matter. Maybe your comment will be the line that gives them courage. Maybe your share will be the bridge that reaches them when they need it most. I once thought I was only one tired storyteller. But when my words went out into the world, I learned something powerful. A story is never alone. It carries others, it finds echoes, it multiplies into a chorus. And so I leave you with this truth, the one carved deepest into my bones. I am not their silence. I am my freedom. Sgs.